It's been a month of long videos, and we're gonna keep it that way. This video has been a whole month in the making, and it's a style study that's been on my list for the longest time. It was also recently requested by an amazing viewer, chichu.mp4. Today we're going to study the work of incredibly popular artist and YouTuber Ericanthonyj. So if you already know why you're here, you can head on over to part 1, the timestamps are in the description, as well as you'll find chapter markers in the seek bar below. But if you're new here, hi, welcome! I promise you're going to fall in love with this series like the rest of us have. Style studies are where we look at some of our favourite contemporary artists and see what we can learn from their style. Keyword, learn. We're not trying to plagiarize someone's work, we're not trying to copy their style, we're simply analysing it and seeing what we can take from it and apply to our own work. I usually do these style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to take a closer look at Eric's work, analyse it and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of Eric's original paintings. The reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. As always, if you enjoyed this video and find it helpful, then let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and leaving a comment below. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss another upload on this channel. And if you're looking for exclusive content and tutorials every single week, then you can hit that join button and become a channel member. But for now, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Ericanthonyj. Ericanthonyj is a self-taught illustrator and concept designer who specializes in these beautiful portraits that are all over my Instagram explore page. No, I'm not going to address the farting cult. Don't ask. I said don't ask. His Patreon says he's based in Germany, but his ArtStation says he's in New York, and honestly, for all you know, he could be on an island somewhere saving a turtle right now. But I did notice a light German accent, so do with that info what you will. His art mainly consists of bust shots of these gorgeous aesthetic women. It's like if you were to take the Visco girl aesthetic, but make it fine art. His characters are stunning, almost too perfect if such a thing exists. So understandably, his work has brought him over 282,000 followers on Instagram and over 225,000 subscribers here on YouTube. And at a quick glance, you might think that his art is pretty straightforward, but listen, this study has been a head scratcher. On the surface, it looks completely effortless, but there is a reason it took me the entire month to really put together this video, so get ready to have your perceptions change forever. Also, quick side note, is anyone else absolutely terrified of that TikTok girl who filmed herself sleepwalking? I don't know, man, there is just something so eerie about people not being consciously aware of what their bodies are doing. I suppose you can say I'm scared of somnambulists. Look, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel here. So, here are 4 key characteristics to Eric's art. Yep, no build-up, we're diving directly into the entire painting all at once. And we're gonna start that by taking a look at how Eric expertly uses contrast. I know what you're thinking, Srish, there is no contrast, everything is so softly blended. Listen, I'm gonna blow your mind right now, because guess what? The blending is part of the contrast. You see, when it comes to contrast, we quite literally see it as a black and white thing. We understand contrast in terms of values, highlights versus shadows, or in terms of the colors, red versus green. But contrast can be way more sophisticated than that. You can have contrast in hard and soft edges, in small and large details, and even in areas of high and low contrast. You guys, that is what you see here. The contrast levels are what create contrast in Eric's work. So yes, there are massive areas of super smooth blending where you have skin that is so soft and so very low contrast. But then you look at the hair and the clothes and you'll see hard edges and high contrast, and a lot of this comes from value separation. The skin contains values that lie within a narrow range, so there isn't too much of a value shift between the darkest and lightest values in the skin. Don't worry, the skin gets its own point later in this list, but for now just keep in mind that the skin is an area of low contrast. However, in the areas surrounding the skin, such as the hair and clothing, you'll see a big difference between the lightest and darkest values. More specifically, you'll see much stronger shadows in the hair and clothes, which is something Eric avoids placing in the skin. There are a lot of big, smooth planes, but they are separated and interspersed with harder, flat, high contrast details. I'd even go as far as to say it's a 2:1 ratio between the smooth versus hard areas, and this ratio kind of helps to make the 3D rendering look even more 3D. Why? Because our eyes don't see absolutes, they see relatives. If, for instance, Eric were to render everything with the same amount of blending, your eyes would skim the surface of the painting and then just get bored and slide right off. In other words, if everything was blended, you wouldn't really appreciate the quality of the blending because your eye hasn't seen any different. And vice versa, if everything was super flat with hard details and no blending, your eye would still slide right off the canvas. Even though there are more details, because there are no blended softer areas, your eye is gonna get bored. And that is where contrast comes in. Because when you put two opposing things together, they play off of each other and create a ton of interest, and that is what keeps you interested in a painting. Also, I quickly want to mention that the biggest piece of contrast in Eric's work comes from a super flat, super bright background. It really makes the painting pop, both in terms of the darker shadowy tones and in terms of the different levels of detail. Alright, so I alluded to this before, but Eric paints the kind of faces that every visco girl dreams of. Or I guess they're called TikTok girls now. Basically, these super youthful faces with idealized proportions that look just shy of realistic, and they are cutesy without literally looking childlike. So you have the usual big eyes, strong eyebrows, and defined jawline. You have the cute button nose with a delicate sloping nose bridge and the full pouty lips, and they always have perfect skin with maybe a tasteful spattering of freckles. In general, the hair is darker than the skin, but if not, there is usually a dark shadow that separates the two. But as far as the contrast goes, you generally see the darkest tones around the eyes and the eyebrows, and the lips are generally that natural but better tone with a bit of a gloss. And while the skin itself is large expanses of soft blending, you do see sharp details in the eyes, the edges of the brows, the nostrils, and the mouth. However, like I said, while the features are resized to be a little more idealistic, the characters don't look like literal children, and that is because of how these features are positioned. This is something we've seen in the Angel Ganev style study. I've linked that up in the cards, and this is what helps you add age to a character without making them look super old. You stylize the size of everything on the face, but you don't mess with the positions of them. So while a lot of stylized art has the eyes super low on the face to emulate that baby-like skull proportions, Eric keeps the eyes fairly high up on the face, around the halfway mark, like you would see in a realistic adult face. And it's the same thing when it comes to the lips and the nose. It stays in the realistic positions on the face. And that is what creates this illusion of these portraits passing as realistic, but not quite. Okay, so there are a couple of things I want to mention when it comes to the values. One is the range, and second, the hardness of the edges in between values. So first of all, let's look a little closer at the difference in the range of values across the painting. I found that this varies greatly depending on the material. So for instance, the skin is a different material to the eyes, the hair is a different material to the clothes, and the nails are a different material to the jewelry. And each defined material has a different value range, both in terms of how dark or light it gets and in how many values lie in between the darkest and lightest tones. So on the surface of the skin, while there isn't much of a difference between the lightest and darkest tones, as in the value range is narrow, there is a whole array of in-between tones. That is what creates a super blended look. On the other hand, if we look at the hair, while the range varies, as in you have a big difference between the darkest and lightest tones, or a small difference between them, it doesn't really matter, there is almost always just one or two in-between tones. And this is why you see a much flatter style of rendering in the hair, where there isn't any blending at all. But then you look at the way Eric renders fabric, and it is kind of a blend of these two techniques. So you do have a variable range of values, like in the hair, but you also have a large number of in-between values, like with the skin. So the fabric can appear really well blended too, but it looks completely different to the skin because you actually have bright brights and dark darks. So you see, I told you there is a lot of nuance in Eric's work that makes it so distinctive and recognizable. Alright, and finally, let's take a look at what I like to call the clay skin effect. Like we've already seen about a million times today, the skin is super well blended and dimensional, but it doesn't look airbrushed per se. A good contrast to this would be the work of Blue Satan, where Julia does actually use a lot of airbrush to create that well blended look. However, when you look at Eric's work, it is very obviously not airbrushed, but at the same time, you don't see very dramatic value shifts or hard edges. And this is why I like to call it the clay skin effect. Because you can see the dimensionality and form and shapes in the skin, but at the same time, you see no texture on it. And the key to this look is control. And I'm talking about control in a bunch of different ways. First of all, you want to remember that the lighting is generally very flat, or what they call beauty lighting. So you don't have any dramatic shadows, no Rembrandt lighting, none of that. Everything is well lit, super visible, and most importantly, very evenly lit. Now, bear in mind, we're talking about a quote typical Ericanthonyj portrait, so obviously there's going to be exceptions, but most prominently you'll see that there aren't any hard shadows, so the lighting is very flat and evenly controlled. Second, you want to control the range of values and hues. So the darkest and lightest tones on the skin, if you were to put it on a black to white value scale, they would lie within a very narrow mid-tony range. And like we've seen, there are a ton of values in between the darkest and lightest tones in the skin for sure. However, the biggest reason that the skin looks almost too flawless is because there are very few, very heavily controlled hue shifts. So again, I'm going to allude to Julia Razumova's work because you'll see a whole bunch of hue shifts in the skin alone. You have your pinks, oranges, yellows, purples, greys, and even blues, and that's in one face. With Eric's work, however, the hues generally lie within a red and orange spectrum, with maybe a little bit of purple in the shadows if he's feeling experimental. However, when you look at realistic or hyper-realistic skin, a lot of the times you'll notice a lot of areas where the hue is completely different, such as areas of discoloration, freckles, dark circles, veins, rosacea, and such. Real skin is highly changeable, especially depending on lighting. The only time you see skin as a flat single hue is when someone has heavy makeup on and has concealed it to perfection. And that is why Eric's portraits look so unrealistically perfect. It's like there are no imperfections, no marks that you could accumulate from actually living a normal life. In fact, it almost feels like there is so much smooth blending in the skin that there is almost nothing that lies underneath, and nothing can affect the skin and alter it in any way. And that is why these portraits look so perfect, almost unrealistically so. One last thing I want to mention that, again, creates that super perfect smooth skin effect is the lack of specular highlights in the skin. Specular highlights appear on skin when it's glossy or wet, and a lot of people, myself included, will add a highlighter on the face to create an artificial specular highlight. However, the presence of specular highlight can also indicate texture, because there is a reason that particular spot is catching the light so brightly. So in getting rid of that specular highlight completely, Eric is further pushing that completely flawless, untouchable skin effect. And honestly, I gotta get me some of that mattifying powder. So, to quickly sum up this section, here are the 4 key characteristics to Ericanthonyj's art. Number 1, he uses contrast as a power move, not just in the values, but also in the hardness of the edges. 2, while the proportions are slightly exaggerated or minimized to make the face appear slightly more aesthetically pleasing, Eric doesn't really alter the positions of the facial features, thus making them appear realistic, but not quite. Number 3, he changes the range of values and the number of midtones between the darkest and lightest values depending on the material that he's painting. So while the skin has a small range between the highlights and shadows, there are way more in-between values, and while the hair has a large difference between the dark and light values, there aren't too many midtones. And number 4, Eric pushes the perfect, flawless skin effect by controlling every part of it. So there is a very narrow range of values, the lighting is very flat, and there are no specular highlights, all of which create this mattified clay skin effect. For the study today, this is the reference that I've chosen. I found it on Eric's Instagram where he mentioned it was just a quick sketch. Did that cause me to go in a little too confidently and expect it to be done within the hour? Yes. Did I live up to that expectation? Nope. I skipped my afternoon nap on a Sunday to paint this in one sitting because I'm just that stubborn. But I thought this would be a good place to experience all 4 points from part 1. So as you can tell, my first construction lines with this face were just completely off, as in the proportions were just not right, but that was because I had the eyes too low and face too wide. So in the refined sketch, I narrowed the face up a little, and that is when it all came together. As far as the rendering is concerned, I definitely had a bit of a learning curve when it came to controlling the contrast in the skin. Because there are such subtle value shifts in the midtones, I definitely had to do a lot of color adjusting using the levels and brightness contrast adjustments and painting and repainting the areas of shadow time and time again. However, here is something I noticed that a lot of digital artists have in their finished product, and it is only recently that I figured out what it was. I was watching a video by Ericanthonyj that popped up on my recommended about this secret hack thing, and boy did it change my world. I'm not gonna spoil it too much because I really think you should go watch her video, but what really helped me achieve that hard edge but low contrast look in the skin was to apply the Smart Sharpen filter a couple of times as I painted along. I still think my final painting turned out looking a little too high contrast compared to the original, but this was definitely one of the more challenging studies that I've done in recent times. Alright, so let's get to the most creative step of every style study, the original painting. Although Eric's style is rather different than mine, I thought this would be a good example of how you can apply the things that you learn from these style studies without just straight up copying someone's style. So today I'm going to take up the challenging task of mixing Eric's painting choices with my own style, and we're going to paint the final addition to the Dark Zodiac series, Pisces. Pisces is a mutable water sign and the final sign of the zodiac. It is said to be the most emotionally mature of all signs since it embraces and absorbs the strengths of all 11 zodiac signs that come before it. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, which is a planet of intuition, creativity, and mysticism. As such, Pisces is said to be the most creative and intuitive of all signs. It is sensitive and dreamy, and it is the quintessential embodiment of the divine feminine at its most balanced. And fun fact that I didn't even know until I researched this, Pisces is also one of the oldest recorded zodiac signs, with its symbol, the two fish, appearing on an Egyptian coffin lid from 2300 BC, as well as some inscriptions found here in India that are said to come from the year 10,000 BC. That's crazy. However, when it goes dark side, Pisces can be careless and gullible, overly emotional and highly sensitive, irrational, naive, and lazy. Look, these are not my words, this is what the astrology community says. In Greek mythology, there are a couple of variations on the story behind the constellation of Pisces. The story goes that Typhon, a god of chaos and destruction, had been ostracized by all of the other gods on Olympus, and as revenge for his isolation and the ridicule that he'd faced for all of his life, Typhon attacked Olympus, going after all of the gods who had hurt him. Some stories say that Gaia, the earth, actually sent Typhon to attack the gods on Olympus. But in either case, it is said that in order to escape the wrath of Typhon, the goddess Aphrodite and her son Eros, or Cupid as he's known in pop culture, turned themselves into a pair of fish and escaped by jumping into the Great Sea. Another version of this story says that two giant fish appeared out of nowhere, and Aphrodite and Eros were able to hop on their backs and escape Olympus. As gratitude, the gods immortalized the two fish among the stars as the constellation of Pisces. The Indus Valley civilization saw fish as a divine source of life, and there are actually records of many ancient civilizations that saw Pisces as a symbol of the completion of our soul's journey, as well as a time of planting seeds towards the beginning of a new cycle. Ancient Egypt worshipped the great fish, who was said to have once saved the life of Isis, or Aset, the goddess of fertility. In gratitude, Aset put the great fish and all of its descendants among the stars, and two of these descendants were said to have taken the form of the constellation of Pisces. In this painting, I've shown Pisces to be a heartbroken mother who has just found some fish lying dead in the sand. I took a bit of inspiration from the Five of Cups imagery in tarot, where she only sees the three dead fish in front of her, not the two that are alive and well behind her in the ocean. She is so blinded by the pain and sorrow that she pays no heed to her little son, who is trying desperately to warn her about the oncoming storm. All she sees is the death of these little sea creatures, and it consumes her so deeply, she doesn't even consider the potential danger to herself or her son. Plus, if you notice, her son has the lower half of a goat. And again, if you followed this series closely, that should hopefully ring a bell, I'm just saying. So anyway, here is Pisces, the inconsolable. And there we have it, Ericanthonyj demystified. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and if you have, then let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and commenting below. Hit that subscribe button / notification bell so you don't miss a future upload on this channel. And if you'd like exclusive, super intensive step-by-step tutorials every single week, where I share with you every single step I take when I paint in real time, then you can become a channel member by hitting the join button, or come check out my Patreon and grab access to all of it super early. Come join the Discord, it is free, and I'm considering doing Discord specific videos in the near future. So if you'd like to be more involved in the community, then check out the link in the description, as well as in the pinned comment below. And with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope it's been as much fun for you as it has for me. I'll leave a playlist containing all my other style study videos up here so you can binge watch all of them, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!